Brad, you're a longtime Philadelphia resident, probably now a native son at this point. After what is it, 20 years of Philadelphia living?
At this point, we moved to Philadelphia in 1998, and my son points out I've officially lived in Philadelphia longer than I've lived anyplace else. So I guess I have to call myself a Philadelphian.
Okay, all right. Well, so here's the thing. As everyone, longtime listeners of this show know, I love to josh around about Philadelphia, just because Philadelphia's got a bit of a reputation, right?
Yeah.
Philly is Philly. But I saw this tweet, Brad, the other day that I had to share with you. This comes in from the Twitter account of This Is Me Whatevs is the name of the Twitter account, right? And the quote says, "The great thing about Philadelphia is you literally can't insult them. They take any attempt at insult as either a compliment or an offer to fight, which is also a compliment in Philly."
I've never heard my favorite city summed up so well. That's actually very, very accurate. Let's face it, Dave, this is the city that's known for throwing snowballs at Santa Claus.
Oh, and also, by the way, the snowballs became batteries that next season. Do you remember that?
Yes, I was just going to say they're also known for throwing batteries at sports events.
I think they once booed a baby who was wearing a Mets outfit at a Philly game, right? Yeah. I think they once booed a baby. Yeah. They booed a baby that came up on the big screen. Keep going.
David, Philadelphia sports fans are such a raucous group of people. At one point, they had so many drunken disorderlies at Philadelphia Eagles games, they had to set up a court of law in the basement of the stadium. I think it was Judge Seamus McCafferty, said they had to set up a court because it was getting so expensive to drive them around to prison and stuff. They just take them downstairs, charge them, book them, and go on to the next thing. They had a court set up in the basement of Philadelphia Stadium just for the drunken fans.
Yeah, Philly is the epitome of that old phrase that the West Coast is nice but not kind. The East Coast is kind but not nice.
Absolutely.
Which I think is such a fascinating way to describe the East Coast and West Coast of the U.S. Because New Yorkers and Philadelphia, they'll cuss you out, but then they'll help you with what, like if your car is in their way, they'll get mad at you, they'll call you a piece of shit, but then they'll help you out with the car. Whereas the West Coast, they'll be very kind, but they're not going to help you. They're not going to help you at all.
A great example, I caught one of my neighbors, so one of the new people moving in, this was years ago, I did it in Fables, as a matter of fact, that's how long ago it was. One of the new people moving in.
The Eisner-nominated Fables, I should say, for those not familiar.
Eisner-nominated Fables, yes, had planted a sapling in the front of their house. And again, we don't have front yards. I live, it's a row house situation. So, your house affronts the sidewalk and then it's the street. Well, in this little section of the sidewalk that they had dug out, they had planted a sapling. I caught somebody pouring bleach on the roots.
No.
And I said, why? I don't care. It's not my business, but why? They go, those roots are going to dig into the sewer system. These people are going to have thousands and thousands of dollars of sewer bills. I'm doing them a favor. And I thought, that's nice. It's not kind, but it's nice. They said, and by the way, speaking of somebody who's dropped thousands and thousands of dollars on sewer damage from the trees that were there when I moved in. That was a kindness. It wasn't nice, but it was a kindness.
Can I tell you, Brad? So my street, I don't know why the city planners of Los Angeles in the 50s on my street, they decided we have all these East Coast, transplants after the war. So let's make them feel at home by making big tree plantings in Los Angeles. Los Angeles naturally doesn't have any trees that are over 8 feet. This is legit. Palm trees are imported, elms are imported, magnolias. Nothing is native to Los Angeles. It's fairly deserty naturally, right? So the city planners in the 50s planted on my street these gigantic Louisiana swamp trees. I'm not kidding. I don't remember the name of them. I'll look them up later if anybody cares. But the long and the short of it is they're 50-foot tall trees, and all the roots stay at the surface because they're swamp trees. They spread out wide, right?
Yeah.
And So every 4 or 5 years in Los Angeles now, you have to hire those guys with the camera down the sewer to like go grind your tree roots that have gotten into your sewer, because these were not meant to be trees in Los Angeles.
No.
And in the 50s, they're just like, let's sell these homes. Let's put in Louisiana trees. That's fine. Anyway, so that's
Made sense at the time.
That's California's version of not nice but kind. Like, oh, aren't these trees lovely? They'll ruin your home.
Just give it time.
Yeah. And on that note, I'll say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making nice and kind comics.
And making a living from kind but not nice comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And just a reminder, we have a fantastic group joining us live right now at the patreon.com/comiclab. A group called the Live Gab group. This is the level you can watch the show streaming live every week on Tuesday mornings. It is also archived and recorded, so if you miss it for work or school or family, you can check it out later. And that is over at the $10 level at patreon.com/comiclab.
Absolutely. And this week's show, along with every week's show for the past several months, is brought to you by our good friends at Wacom over at Wacom.com, WACOM.com. They're the makers of the professional, powerful, portable Wacom One.
And Brad, I think they've actually been a sponsor now for like 2 years. We've lost sense of time in the pandemic. They've been sponsoring forever, which frankly, I think from Wacom's perspective, they're like, wait, there's a podcast about cartooning for cartoonists, and the two cartoonists that run the show love our Wacoms and use them all the time. All right, great. We'll just sponsor that constantly, which is great. It works out awesome because Brad and I are legit fans of Wacom, and we have both of the Cintiq Pros and we have the Wacom Ones in the studio, use and love them all the time, and we cannot say enough nice things about our friends at WACOM.com at Wacom.com.
All right, Dave. So let's get right into the show this week. I've got a question that comes in from one of our Patreon backers, Raj Solanki, who says, I wanted to get your opinion on the feasibility of being someone who does comic short stories instead of long, continuous comics. Do you think an audience could form around the idea like this, where there isn't a long epic arc, but instead there are short 10 or 12-page stories that are eventually compiled into a book, somewhat like an anthology, but all of one individual creator's work? So I don't know whether this has been done before. Any tips or warnings for someone who wants to go down this path? Thank you for the constant stream of joy, Raj.
So this is a fun question, Raj, because you're right. I don't know that this has been done before. And if it has, it hasn't been frequent enough that it easily pops into my mind. I'm sure that there is some alt-indie cartoonist that has done a collection of short stories. I'm sure that exists. I just can't think of one at the moment. But I will be honest that there's two considerations. There's the artistic consideration, and then there's the business and marketing consideration, right? Yeah. So the artistic one, I'll jump in first, Brad, and just say, I think it's a lovely idea. I have no problem with the idea of disconnected, maybe thematically lightly connected short stories that you're creating and producing a whole anthology of you, by you, for your audience. I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. I do have, and we'll get into it in a minute, a lot of business considerations to consider about this. But Brad, first, what do you think about purely the artistic angle of this, of one artist creating disconnected short stories for an anthology?
Well, listen, I get it. I understand where that desire comes from. I think if you're going to look around at other people doing it, you're going to find many people. Well, we were talking about Box Brown just a couple weeks ago on that Gumroad show. You're going to find a lot of people who are doing that. And in other words, they're going the publishing route. And as a result, they do one story here for this publisher. They do one story there for that publisher. And I think that's all a part of the overarching issues that Dave and I are both going to see coming up with this. But in general, in terms of the artistic merit, I totally get it. If you were going to do this, my first reaction is going to be that you're going to want to brand the artist and not the creation. In other words, you're going to want you're going to want to buy like yourname.com. You're going to want to make your website a hub of your creative pursuits. You're going to want to very carefully direct traffic and show people what the wide range of stuff that they can access from you, what that is, and what that range actually is. You're going to have a whole lot of hurdles to cross, but it's really going to come down to branding the artist, not the feature. Now, as far as whether you really want to do this or not, we got to talk about business concerns, right?
Yeah. And Brad had already, in terms of the branding, has already nicely transitioned us over to start talking about it. So let's keep going on that. So the thing is, with any art form, you have to learn first not only the basics of the construction of that art form, how it works, how the internal structure of that art works, what's the best way to portray it, but then you really do have to take in consideration, how is the world going to interact with this? And usually it's going to be for commerce, right? They're gonna find it, buy it, consume it, usually with some kind of dollar amount to it. So then the question becomes, well, why are all TV shows non-streaming produced at the 25-minute mark and the 45-minute mark? Well, because you have to fit in with the half an hour to hour rule, and you have to allow for advertising and all that. And so you get, in Europe, you'll get, like, a BBC will produce a 16-minute show. And then you'll never see that on the American terrestrial market, because it can't fit into the half an hour or hour format. Now with streaming, you're getting all sorts of flourishing of weird times of, like, this episode of Boba Fett is 45 minutes. That episode of Boba Fett is 110 minutes, and you're like, why? This makes no sense. What's happening? Because it's streaming. But what I'm getting at is, if you wanted to, in the traditional sense, produce a comic strip, you had to do 3 or 4 panels, usually 4. You couldn't come into and be like, it's the best comic strip ever written, I promise you, but it's 7 panels. They'd be like, yeah, we don't care. It's got to be 4 panels or nothing,
Yeah.
Similarly, you can't produce a 110-minute version of the TV news show 60 Minutes. They're going to be like, no, fuck you. We want 60 minutes. That's literally what we're doing here.
It's called 60 Minutes.
Yeah,
it's right there in the title.
Minutes. So what I'm getting at there is, it's really hard to sell this book, because how will you have enticed people in all the ways that people approach comics to say, I like the way that Raj does Westerns. I also want to see how Raj does a sci-fi and a romance and a period piece and an introspective loner in an apartment piece. Like, these are all disconnected stories that Raj is doing. Yeah. How did I come to know Raj? How did I come to know these stories? How do I come to find this anthology, right, Brad? It's trickier to sell and market that book.
Frankly, it's going to be a branding nightmare, because what's going to happen is you've got 2 stories. One of them's about astronauts. The other one's about cowboys. Now you try to put both of those stories in an anthology, and now you got to try and sell that book. And let's just say it's an anthology of 2, just to make this simple. Now you've got one person comes up to look at the book. They like astronauts, but they don't like cowboys. Now they're not going to buy a book that's 50% cowboys, because they don't like cowboys. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Now you got another guy come up, and he's got a cowboy hat on, and he's got his lariat on his hip, and he doesn't want anything to do with their astronauts. And unless you've really, really done an amazing job of branding yourself as a certain that you do storytelling the way no one else does. And they will be, like, for example, Rod Serling told stories the way no one else was telling stories. Rod Serling could do a cowboy one week, and he could do an astronaut the next week, because he was telling them a certain way. And if you could pull that off, then I think you'd have an easier job of it. But you're going to have a handful of these short stories that you're going to have a real market. It's not impossible, but you're going to have a real challenge for yourself in how to package those to a consumer who might not like cowboys.
Right. And so it becomes, it's a little bit that we're all prisoners of the time that we're born in the sense of, like, there are markets that exist. Yes, you could create new markets. Yes, you could create new ways of branding and distributing a short story. But unfortunately, in the time we live, it just is going to be really hard to market and sell that, in the same way that it would have been hard for R. Crumb to do a syndicated comic strip in 1975. It just wasn't his wheelhouse. Or vice versa. It would have been hard for Schultz to do a Haight-Ashbury 20-page short story like R. Crumb was doing, right? Like, everyone's sort of born into and fits into a certain part of comics, and it's hard when that part doesn't even exist. It doesn't even really, you don't see in fact, now that I think about it, Crumb might have done anthologies of short stories, but that was only after 20 or 30 years of kind of earning his chops for a specific kind of audience, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't come out of the gate with that, basically, is what I'm saying.
No. And take a look at, there are other places where we see this same thing kind of raise its ugly head, if you will. Take a look at authors, prose authors.
Yeah.
Once you become known for writing one certain type of book, and you want to write a different book, let's say you've got a vampire romance that you're producing under one name, and now you want to write something that's a period piece. You, as an author, you've got to actually come up with a different pen name for that second piece, because if you put it out under your first name, people are going to be like, "Where's the vampires? Where's the romance?" You know, they want they brand that thing with what you're known for. And as a result, there's an awful lot of authors that have any number of screen names, any number of pen names that they use for any number of different things. They do those different stories, but they have to be very cautious about the branding. And I think that's going to be something that you'd come up against as well.
Yeah, I think so. And look at how most anthologies are marketed and sold into the market. Usually, if it's a successful one, what you will see is they picked a theme, right? Mm-hmm. That's the main marketing point. Is like, this is all short stories set in the year 2400, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the theme.
Yeah.
And here are the 5 big names that you know in this anthology, the 5 so-so names you might have heard of, and the 5 people you've never heard of before, right? And so everybody kind of goes into an anthology knowing, I'm going to like 3 of the stories, I'm going to kind of like 3 of the stories, and I'm definitely not going to like 3 of the stories. Like, we all no matter who created the anthology, I'm not being mean, no one likes 100% of an anthology, you know?
Which is exactly why I never buy anthologies. I hate them so much because there's usually there's only like 1 or 2 good ones, and I got to slog through a whole bunch of horrible ones to get to the ones that I like. But that's neither here nor there. But go on with that point, because I think you're driving to something important there. Anthologies are built around a theme.
Yeah, they're built around a theme, and usually the marketing involves a big push by the 10 to 15 authors that came together to make the book. They're individually pushing it to their audiences.
Yeah.
So you have a dispersed possibility of an audience, right? That's greater than any sum of its parts, basically. And so what I'm saying is, it's hard to make this same kind of sale saying, I don't have a theme. The theme is it's all me. And you might not know who I am, and you might not know the quality of my short stories, because how would you have seen them before?
Yeah.
Right, Brad? I mean, it gets tricky. It gets tricky to do.
Yeah. You're going to have a branding issue that you're going to have to solve. I don't want to tell you that it can't be done.
No, in fact, I wish we lived in a world where it was easier, because we'd have more experimentation and interest of basically would allow us more to try or dip our toes in different things. Like, wouldn't it be fun if Brad could do a sci-fi story for just 15 pages? Wouldn't it be fun if Dave Keller could try romance for 15 pages and just sort of try it out?
I would read that.
The answer is it would not be fun for me. I'd be sweating the whole time.
That's why I would read it.
But here's the thing, though, Raj, I want this to work for you. I want this to be a world where this was possible. I'm just saying, from a marketing and branding and selling standpoint, I think it might be harder than your heart wants it to be.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, Dave, I've got another question from a Patreon backer, and we're going to go from anthologies to animation. You'll notice we're still in the A's. This one comes in from Adam.
ComicLab, your alphabetically oriented show
That's right. Adam says, hey, Comics Unks, do you see any value of adding light animated effects to your comics? Now, I'm going to pause right there because that's a tricky sentence. I think when Adam says light animated effects, he doesn't mean animated effects that have to do with light. I think he's saying light as in not heavy lifting, the opposite of heavy. Like a little bit of it, not like a headlight or a flashlight.
I read it as 20 to 60 minutes of animation fiddling is what I read.
Right, just a little like
a zhuzh of animation, Brad.
A little touch of animation.
And a moose boosh of animation on top of the comic. Yes.
Upon reading my new comic in vertical scroll format, my brother, who is a web developer, suggested parallax animations could bring added depth to a comic. Could this be a value add to drive traffic to a personal website?
Ooh, I have a lot of thoughts on this. Okay, so first is, you know the old saying of like, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, or every problem looks like it could be solved by like a nail? It's not an accident that your brother, who's a web developer, goes, you know what this needs? Some motion graphics. That's what this needs. Like, you wouldn't see that from your plumber uncle. He wouldn't be like, oh, I like the comic, but you know what this needs is some graphics. That's what it's only because your brother's a web developer. So anyway, so that's thought number one. Thought number two is, boy, how fun is it that we live in a world where you can add animation to comics? We've all done it. Brad's done it. I've done it. There's one or two where I have an animated GIF at the final panel, or Brad had Flash at some point, I think, or maybe that was Scott that had Flash at one point. Anyway, we've all tried it because it's fun to try to dip your toe in it once in a while. But I will say this, as a recurring task, I do not know that animation is worth it, in the sense of, did you get into this business to be an animator, or did you get into this business to be a cartoonist? They are different in the same way that a filmmaker and a photographer is different, right? We are creating a siloed piece of art where the strength of the writing and the strength of the art together as a 1-2 punch should produce a static image that moves people enough that they enjoy it and come back. If that's not working, adding animation to it doesn't necessarily help.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to talk about on this. The first one is that comes to my mind is that anytime you're talking about something like this, you're making a difference between the thing that people start to fall in love with on the web and the book that you eventually want them to buy. And let's not kid ourselves, the book is where the money is, right? Or at least a big chunk of the money. That's how most of us monetize, is through books. And now your book cannot have animation effects. So you're setting up a block between the web version and the print version. Now, that never stopped Homestuck. Pardon me.
You got there.
That never stopped Homestuck. But, at the same time, the first thing I always tell you on this show is never base your business on the outliers. And Homestuck was an outlier. You can't say, well, Homestuck did it, so I can do it. Homestuck was definitely an outlier in this and was, in that respect, kind of a special circumstance. However, it doesn't mean that it can't be done. It just means that you are setting up a difference between that thing on the web and the thing that you hope that they're going to buy. Right. But there's an even bigger issue here. And what I'm hearing is that you're not confident in your writing or in your visual storytelling. And what I want to tell you is your writing and your visual storytelling is a journey. It may, I don't know what your stuff is. I don't know that I've ever seen your stuff, right? But wherever you are, you're going to keep on getting better. The more you work at it, I trust in that. I want you to have that same trust in yourself. And what I'm hearing here is a push button problem for a insecurity in your writing and your visual storytelling.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I want you to not take the push button solution and to double down and look, find the nearest mirror and tell that person you see there that they are good enough to pull this off. They are going to write a good story. They are going to do a good visual storytelling, and they're not going to take the push button. They're going to make a good comic.
Oh my God, you really did become a comics uncle right there. Like, I want you to look in that mirror and you tell that person, you know what, there's a beauty there and a strength. And you know what, they're going to strive every day. They're going to do that. There's going to be some stumbles, champ. But you're going to, and Brad's just over here tussling your hair. You know what, you're going to get back up on that scraped knee and you're going to say, I can do this.
You're going to ride that. Well, it's just like that embroidered pillow that you've got over there from Susan McTaggart. Do you remember that one?
Oh yeah, I remember the embroidered pillow that I have from Susan McTaggart. Oh, you jerk. And Susan. Hi, everybody. Susan McTaggart here, the author of the new book, Finding the Best You by Finding the Real You. And of course, I want to tell you about my new embroidered pillow collection, the shining star of which is the one that says, when you fall, get back up. And when you get back up, make sure you soar. This has been Susan McTaggart coming to you live, telling you all the greatest things that you can do for yourself.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I wasn't at all ready to do a Susan McTaggart. I have not had enough coffee. I have not had enough coffee this morning to come up with something quickly. All right.
My God.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm kind of repeating the same point, but a problem that I see with a lot of cartoonists of all ages is they go, oh, Instagram likes motion, TikTok likes volume. Oh, they both like spoken and they both like visuals. And comics are so static. Here's the thing. If that's what you enjoy, change from a comic strip to an animation. That's fine. If you enjoy that, great. Go with God. Have fun with that. Yeah. But most of us got into comics to make comics. So ask yourself if you're changing what you want to do because you think TikTok, Instagram, and the broader web require animation, in which case you got to become an animator, or ask yourself if that's what you really want to do, because they are very different things with very different asks over the next 40, 50 years of what you've got to produce.
Yeah, let me. Now that I've been supportive uncle, now I'm going to be mean uncle, and I should have done it the other way around. But there's another way of saying that, and the truth of the matter is that all of the animations, all of the push buttons, all the sparkles, all of the parallax effects aren't going to save a comic that isn't done well, that isn't written well, doesn't have good visual storytelling. That's called spraying perfume on a turd. Right? At the end of the day.
A phrase I've never heard.
Oh, we used to use that in newspapers all the time.
Really?
Geiger, you really sprayed perfume on that turd. But that's the other way. At the end of the day, the thing that's going to clinch it with you and your audience is not going to be the animation. It's going to be, did you tell a good story?
Right. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So can you do it? Absolutely. Is it something you want to have in your toolkit among all the millions of other things that we talk about in terms of sequentiality, good writing, good character design, good environments? Yes, absolutely. It's something for your toolkit. Do you want to do it every day? I don't think so. I don't think the repeatability is worth it in terms of effort. I don't think it's what you set out to do when you wanted to become a cartoonist, was to become an animator, which are very different things. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, you can, but should you? I don't think so. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. All right, Brad, well, our next question coming in from patreon.com/ComicLab says, hey, my question is, how much work should I do before doing a Kickstarter? I have an ongoing webcomic and would like to make a Kickstarter for a printed version. Smart. Obviously, I need to know print prices, etc., but I also need to take time to prepare all the strips. I'm doing this comic as a hobby, living the luxury. Living your luxury is already becoming a stated phrase in the ComicLab world. That's great. I'm doing this comic as a hobby, and I have a job, a family, etc. Should I put in weeks of evening work beforehand, although the Kickstarter might fail? I see where they're coming at with this one. That's an interesting point. So, Brad, this question, how do you answer it, Brad? How much work goes into a Kickstarter before you launch it? And I think we can separate it. It feels clear like they know they have to do all the business preparation, right?
Yeah.
Figuring out the shipping price, figuring out the printing costs, figuring out cost of goods sold, all that sort of stuff. They're asking specifically about the art preparation and the book preparation.
Yeah.
How much of that do you do before a Kickstarter starts?
All of it. All of it. There is no other answer. Final answer.
Ding,
flip
ding.
over. Flip over all the cards. We're done here. All of it. And all you need to do, we've had people come on the show talk about this years and years ago. One of our early shows, we talked about how not doing this caused so many problems that it had a ripple effect in this person's career for years afterwards, right?
Yeah.
And this is so easy to happen. Because it sounds great. I'm going to do my Kickstarter, and then once I've got the money, I'm just going to get all that work done, and it'll be out. And I'll add some extra months to my runtime on the Kickstarter. Everybody will understand. It never works like that. You can so easily get behind the 8 ball and not deliver on what you're promising. And I have worked with people in the past who have done this. I advised them strongly against doing it. And I said, you're going to spend your Kickstarter money. You're going to spend it on rent or any number of other things. They said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And then a few months later, they said, I did that. Now what do I do? I said, I don't know. Go back in time and take my advice the first time. I don't know what you do. There's no room for equivocation. All of your work, you have to be ready to hit that button and send it off to the publisher when your Kickstarter money clears, because you are courting disaster doing otherwise.
Courting Disaster, also another title from Brad Geiger. We're working through the entire Geiger library today. No, but I was going to give a tiny bit of equivocation to Brad's answer, but in general, I think Brad's right. The worst sort of emotional, psychological, and business flameouts that I've ever seen other professional cartoonists do is when they do that exact thing. They kickstart the thing that wasn't done. And so I've seen it, people at the 15-year point, the 20-year point, and the 25-year point of their career still make that mistake where, like, I'm going to kickstart it. Then if it goes, then I'll do the work. But the problem, as Brad says, is I don't know what happens psychologically, because the money already came in. Either it gets harder to do, or the money starts getting spent on, because my transmission blew, or, little Jimmy needs to get that tooth pulled, and that's $1,000, and or this or that. All the little bills add up. And then what's weird is, because psychologically they've already spent the money, it's harder to do work that should have been done already, and that gets tricky. What I'm saying is, I know people who are long past due on Kickstarters that had it just been done before they kickstarted, this whole emotional problem would have been avoided, the whole psychological problem, the whole economic problem, because now it's a branding and a marketing issue, because you in a little bit ways have lost trust because it took so long to make the thing that you had promised was done when it wasn't done. The cartooning was done, but the actual book prep wasn't done.
Yeah, and that's the right answer. It's the right answer today. If you would have asked us this question 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was the right answer then. But even with that in mind, it's even more the right answer now, because I don't know about you, Dave. I actually wrote an email to my print person asking, to start the process on getting quotes and stuff. I still don't think I want to pull the trigger on a print job this year, because due to the COVID and shipping problems and paper shortages, I still don't know that I want to do a book this year. But imagine with all of that, and you're going to be behind on your Kickstarter, and then you're going to deal with paper shortages. What if the paper price rises? And this is a very real circumstance you could find yourself in. What if you do the Kickstarter now, and then in 6 months, when you finally get around to putting this book together,
the longer you wait,
the paper money, the paper costs go way up, and then there's you finally get this thing out the door, and then it takes twice as long to ship it to you as you thought it would. This is a disaster waiting to happen.
Like, a lot of people that are listening now haven't lived through inflation before, and it can catch up to you real quick if there's 4 to 7% quarterly inflation on basic goods and services and transportation costs. So I super agree with Brad. I will say this. Sometimes Beth and I will have a book 70%, 80% put to bed, and then we'll start the Kickstarter knowing full well that we will finish it during the 30 weeks or 30 days of the Kickstarter. But I'm going to say this against my own self. That's not the greatest idea, because we are 2 adults working 40 hours a week to finish that book. That's one thing. You might not have 2 adults ready to finish out a book. It takes a lot of time to put a book to bed, right? Yeah. And then the second thing is that you think that you're going to have a lot of time in those 30 days. A Kickstarter takes up a lot of
Yeah.
emotional time and actual physical moments in the day where you're just like, oh, I got to update this image. Oh, I got to revise this listing. Oh, I've got to change this reward level. There's a billion things, and there's a bunch of messages that come in for a Kickstarter. It gets exhausting to both promote and answer, do the customer service and update the site. And so if you think, oh, I'll have plenty of time in those 30 days to do it, I would think, again, that gets real dangerous. And then the second thought for Brad in terms of Kickstarting is, if you have these books ready, Brad, I know this is not part of the question, but it's a friendship advice to you. Yeah. I would pull the trigger and get a quote, lock it in, pay for it, and then just kickstart it with a big lead time in terms of like, give yourself 6 more months than you ever would need. You'll get the book done. You'll get it. Paper is being produced. Books are being produced. It's just slow right now, you know?
Yeah. No, you're right. But I was just sharing that to say that I'm nervous about it. And I've got everything lined up. You know, and if I'm nervous doing that, you should be extra nervous with what you're thinking about.
And Brad's point about inflation, though, is a really good one, too, in terms of like if you kickstart at this price, but then 7 months from now, it should have been
that can be a killer.
You know, this plus 4% or 6%. Yeah, that's dangerous.
I've got one final point, and it's that comes down to that last sentence in your question. Should I put in weeks of evening work beforehand, although the Kickstarter might fail?
Oh, yeah. What a great point to focus in on. Yes, go ahead.
My friend, for now on, I want you to start planning for what might happen if you succeed. I want to see you start planning. What happens if I get good? What happens if I succeed? I don't want you to plan for failure. I want you to plan for success. Right? I want you to take the absolute opposite look at this and not go into this thinking, oh, well, the Kickstarter's not going to go over. I want you to start getting this book together with the idea that this Kickstarter's going to be a success. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And then you start working towards your next success. But this whole idea of going forward, worrying about what's going to happen if it fails, I don't like that. I want you to start planning for what happens if this succeeds.
Because in planning for success, let's say you kickstart this thing and for whatever reason, you set your goal at, I don't know, let's make up a number, $1,000 and you only made $800, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, darn it, now I'm not going to kickstart the book. But here's what you've done. You've self-taught yourself how to put together a book at this point. You've practiced layout. And frankly, the book is done. So as your audience grows in the year ahead, maybe you come back to this exact same Kickstarter 2 years from now. You keep all the you know, the lessons learned from this one and you try again. So it's not even a failure, even if it crashes and burns. You've still gained real world experience. You've gotten the book done and you can come right back at it. So, well, Brad, let's move into our next question today from Mark Ashworth over at patreon.com/ComicLab. Mark is a member, as you should be, friends. Just a reminder, you can jump in on the Patreon over at patreon.com/ComicLab. And Mark writes, Patreon and alternate sites were built from the ground up to have subscriptions. Now, other platforms that are primarily free, such as DeviantArt and Twitter, are adding subscriptions. But there seems to be some pushback from the audiences for being asked to pay, even if only part of the new content being added is paywalled. For most platforms, it isn't hard to create a social media new account. Please discuss the merits of starting a second account, quote, for profit account with 100% subscription on the same platform and promoting it in the original free account using the 4 C's, presuming this isn't a silly attempt to bypass the first commandment of comics. Brad, what do you think about this? So let's take Twitter as an example. You've got a free account on Twitter. You've used it for X number of years. You've built a certain following, but now you want to squeeze a little juice out of that lemon. You're like, I'm gonna put a paid account up, push everybody to join that one. And then I guess stage 3 is profit from the underwear trolls there. I don't know, or underwear gnomes. What do you think? What do you think of this idea?
Dave, have you ever watched a driver training instructor out in a parking lot? And, and this driver training instructor puts these orange traffic cones out in the parking lot. And he gets the person behind the wheel and says, hey, take your car and go along these traffic cones and don't knock them down. And you see these kids driving very carefully. What we've just seen with this question is somebody get all the way to the end of those traffic cones, take a hard left, press on the gas, and go right into a brick wall. You got everything right up until the end. Okay. And so we need to rewind here back the car up and try this again. So let's take a look. Patreon and alternate sites were built from the ground up to have subscriptions. You are correct. Patreon is good at getting people to pay for content. That's what they do super well. Now, other platforms that are primarily free are adding subscriptions. Correct. DeviantArt and Twitter are very good at getting messages out, but as you correctly point out in your next traffic cone, there's a big pushback from audiences who don't want to use those things for paying for content. There's your next traffic cone that you just went by. So what you want to do is make things ungodly complicated and obstructive and set up two different social media accounts. One of them is subscription, one of them isn't, to do what they're not built to do, and you crashed right into a brick wall. Instead of doing that, back it up, and here's your last traffic cone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Twitter for what Twitter's good at. I'm going to use DeviantArt for what DeviantArt's good at, and I'm going to use Patreon for what Patreon's good at. That's your final traffic cone. You had it right up until the end, and then you took a left turn. So back it up. Use those different things for what they're good at. Don't try and put a square peg into a round hole and make Twitter do something Twitter's clearly not. How many of these things has Twitter trotted out now? Twitter Blue, tweets for tips, all of these subscription things they're trying to make work, all of them crash and burn as bad as the one before. Use Twitter for what Twitter's good at. Use Patreon for what Patreon's good at. It's all a good system. It all works. We don't need to put a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, whenever I see Twitter coming up with these either tweets for tips or tips for tweets or Patreon Blue or anything, what I see is not like, oh, look at this new service that I as a user can do, or oh, look at this new thing that people are clamoring for. What I see is Twitter going, holy shit, we have 15 years with no user growth and we can't seem to squeeze a dime out of this service. Yeah. How do we figure this out for us? That's them trying to figure it out for them. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to do anything. You don't have to do Twitter Blue. You don't have to do tweets for tips. That's them, the chairman and the executive board going, how do we make money on this damn Twitter thing? Yeah. That's not for you to have to jump through. Don't worry about that. And DeviantArt, the same thing. They're all trying to figure out, and it's the same kind of thing with Adobe with subscription pricing on their software, is that they're all trying to figure out the best way to continuously squeeze money out of you, the same way a gym membership does every month, where you take $5, $3, whatever it is. And so, but to Brad's point, Twitter doesn't do that well because it was never meant to do that well, and it's not going to do that well. Twitter Blue will have a modest, at best, success amongst a few thousand, people, creators that use it well, because Patreon and Kickstarter were exclusively set up to do that. And frankly, from what we've talked about in the past, you don't want to have 9 different ways for people to support you, because from a marketing standpoint, this is what it sounds like. Hey, Brad, you can support Dave Kellett on Patreon or on Indiegogo. I also have a page there, or on GoFundMe, or on Patreon Blue, or on DeviantArt Super Fun Factor, whatever it's called, or on My Journal Space, whatever. Any way you want.
Did I mention Itch.io and also Ko-Fi? I've got a Ko-Fi over there, and I've got Brad, another.
Can you just buy a fella beer? So I just need. What do you need done? You need some yard work done. I'll do whatever you need.
Just use this stuff for what it's good at. And by the way, if Twitter, I think the other one is super followers. That's the one I was trying to think of.
Super followers, yeah.
Let's say Twitter comes up with sometime in its 12th or 13th iteration of all this malarkey, they finally come up with something that works, right? And it magically works. Once you see other people having success at that, that's the time to incorporate it. Is it necessarily up to you to go out and trailblaze this and try to make this work? Absolutely not. Yeah, and you're not going to lose any money. But if all of a sudden you see a big groundswell, by the way, that's exactly how it happened with Patreon. We weren't out there trying to innovate with Patreon. All of a sudden we saw a lot of people doing really well on Patreon, and we said, hey, this is a thing.
Boy, this is not something we've ever really talked about before, but you do not need to be the first adopter in most anything that comics does online.
No,
in fact,
you
if
do not.
if anything, you want to be the 20th adopter in terms of other people having done it and succeeded with it. Clearly, self-evidently clearly that they've succeeded, not just like I think they might have succeeded, but that like it's really working for them. And then what you do is, having not been a first adopter, you iterate and you say, how can I take this thing and make it better?
Yeah.
You want to be the Apple. You don't want to be the first mover. You want to adopt whatever Samsung did 4 years ago and make it better. And that's how you get a $3 trillion valuation. You don't want to be the first adopter in comics. You want to be the iterator that after it's clearly working 6 months, 6 years later, that's when you want to do it. And actually, Brad, it's funny that you said that, because that's been self-evident in our career all along. We were not the first ones to do T-shirts. We were not the first ones to do books. We were not the first ones to go to Patreon or Kickstarter. We let other people cut their teeth, and we go, all right, well, they seem to have survived that, and they seem to be making money. Yes, I will do that now. Because there's a lot of carcasses along the way in comics of being first adopters at a thing.
Oh yeah, listen, I'm thrilled to see a lot of people doing this stuff, but I'm not going to go out there and necessarily do it. And by the way, once that has been established, there's plenty of room for innovation. I feel as if that although we haven't been early adopters, we have been innovators. We've innovated on all kinds of ideas.
Sure.
But we weren't out there trying to create it from whole cloth. You know why? That ain't our core competency. We're cartoonists. We're not developers. We're cartoonists. We're not programmers. My core competency is being a cartoonist. I'll let somebody else be a web developer. I'm going to put funny pictures in boxes.
Yeah, it's a very much an extension of that animation thing. Like, I want to be a cartoonist. I don't necessarily want to be an innovator on business plans that Twitter has got to figure out to make their bottom line better. You know what I mean? That's not my interest. My interest is growing my audience, enjoying my comics, and pairing my books and products with the people that love them. So that's what I want to do best, you know?
And making smart business decisions.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I still remember when Akewood had a subscription program very early. I was like, wow, that's really innovative. Wow, I don't want to be the first one to do that. It's and you see the result of it. It didn't ultimately work because it's hard to be the one that cuts their teeth on it as the first adopter, you know? Great, good idea, good execution, but I waited until Patreon had it, and I was like, now I'm doing it. That was like, thanks, Akewood, now I'm doing it, that kind of thing.
This is a good time to do it. So Dave, as we're wrapping up the show, let's do one more question. This one coming in from Tristan Cox, who says, it's been years since I tried making a webcomic. So I tried to make a pilot issue before committing to a long form comic. Turns out it was a good idea. I now have about 10 pages of varying quality from color, black and white to grayscale, as long as varying line art quality, resolution, speech balloons, gutters, etc. I'm happy with my current art style, and I want to start on the main story. However, is this pilot issue worth finishing and releasing? The quality and style variation makes me worry that some people may be put off by the earlier line art quality, or that they might be expecting a full color comic, and then be disappointed when I fail to deliver on that. On the other hand, I put a few months of work into this, and I hope there might be some value to it, and that might help attract some early readers. Thank you for ComicLab. It is the highlight of my week. Cheers from across the pond, Tristan.
Tristan, that's great. And how fun to have a note from across the pond, as you say. That's fantastic. So here's a couple of things that I think you did really right, Tristan. I think this is the awesome good news is before you jumped in with both feet on the main story, you said, I'm going to try out this pilot. I'm going to try out this test story, basically. And here's what I'm hearing you say. When you say it has, quote, varying line art quality, varying resolution, varying speech balloons, gutters, it is a little bit of color, a little bit of black and white, a little bit of grayscale. Here's what's great about what you just did. You experimented not only with telling the story, but the way you were going to tell the story. That's exactly what you should do with this kind of test pilot, to cut your teeth, as we said a second ago, on like, how do I want to do this? Where do I want to do this? In what manner do I want to do this? And so it's not just a question of like, do I have enough vested interest in the story, but what's the best way to tell that story? So all of that is really, really good. So now the question, Brad, and I'll turn it back to you, is now that he's done all this, it's really, really good. He definitely knows that he's excited about the story. And it sounds like to me, from all the different experimentations along the way, has probably figured out which way he wants to go, whether it's grayscale, line art, or color. They didn't say, but but we think it sounds like they've nailed it. So
Mm-hmm.
now, with that in mind, Brad, what do they do with that short story?
Oh, well, the bad news is I don't think you publish it. I don't think that this is something you put out on your website because, like you already acknowledge, it's gonna mislead a lot of people. It's gonna might even disappoint some people who aren't into the story yet. It's not great marketing for your comic. However, the good news is you've got something that many cartoonists are dying to have in their back pocket, and that is exclusive content. This is wonderful to have in your back pocket for later on down the line. And I don't want you to start this yet. I want you to wait for a little bit until you start building audience. But later on the line, when you're doing a Patreon, this could be something that you offer as part of an ongoing Patreon exclusive. Of course, it's a finite thing. It's 10 pages, so you're going to have to come up with something to do after that. But you've got 10 Patreon posts right there for exclusive members. And that's for people that have already kind of fallen in love with your work. They want to be involved with it. They want to be part of your community. Those are the people that are going to eat this stuff right up. So keep it in your back pocket for a Patreon exclusive sometime. And then later on, when you're doing your first book, guess what? You've got what everybody is desperate to have for their book that they're kickstarting, exclusive pages that no one has ever seen before. You put those in at the back of the book. Here's the pilot. If you're interested in this book, you loved it so much, here's how it started out. And you show it in all of its warts, all of its bad speech balloons, all of its bad
resolutions,
Yes, because this is how
it's sort of a wry smile on you and your reader's part going, oh, wow, look at how far we've come kind of a thing, you know?
Yeah. And then you put that on the book and you say, hey, I know you've read all the stuff online, but here's something you've never seen. And it's going to be at the back of the book.
Of the book. It's got to be at the back. Yeah. But don't put it as a chapter 0. Put it at the back of the book.
But this is a beautiful thing. This is a Patreon exclusive. This is a Kickstarter exclusive. This has value, just not in the way that you think it does.
Brad nailed it on this one. I have nothing to add to this. Brad nailed it. So I'm gonna answer a completely different question on this relatedly, which is, you said I put so many hours into these pages in the past couple of months, and you're feeling like there's got to be a public quid pro quo. I put in the work, so now doesn't it kind of have to be shared after all this work? And here's the thing. Here is the isolated truth of early comics that you're testing out. Not everything has to be shared is the truth. These were you figuring out the style, figuring out the story, figuring out whether or not you wanted to go forward with it, and it worked. The test pilot worked. It did what it should do in terms of gauging what kind of art you wanted to do and gauging whether you had interest in the story. It worked. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that at this point it has to be shared, even though you put a lot of time into it. And take that from two people who have been doing cartooning for 20 plus years online. We know what that's like at the beginning of a project when you're like, I put so much time into it. I want to share it. I know that feeling. But this is not the thing you want to lead with. Put it, as Brad said, put it away in a drawer for a digital drawer and save it for when you're going to do a Patreon exclusive way down the road or the back of the book.
Yeah. And by the way, what Dave is saying is absolutely right. I'm going to go one step deeper on that, because you're saying, doesn't this have value? I worked so hard on it. I want it to have value. It does. The value is it brought you to where you are today.
Exactly.
There's an internal value to that. There's that it had immense value. If you never show this comic to another person, it has immense value. That was time well spent.
Right.
You did not waste your time just because you're not posting it on social media or anyplace else. If that ends up being the case, it doesn't mean that thing doesn't have value. It has immense value. It had the value of bringing you to the place where you're ready to start your comic. And
it got you just a big step forward in your 10,000 hours of being the best cartoonist you can be. So there's a bunch of ways that this helped you, and it's not at all wasted work. Consider this a success. It did what it was meant to do, which was to test out your art, test out your writing, and test out your interest. And all three clicked for you, and now you're ready to go forward with the story. This did what it meant to do. And so, like Brad said, save it for Patreon, save it for the back of a book, save it for a retrospective 10, 15 years from now. You know, however you want to view it in terms of a future payoff. It will pay for itself in terms of time and effort. It already has, but in terms of actually gaining money from it. It will have a value at some point in Patreon or in Kickstarter.
Absolutely. And oh gosh, Dave, I'm so happy you brought up the 10,000 hours. That's another really good point, is that it's some of your 10,000 hours that you're spending in perfecting your craft. And speaking of which, we just spent another hour getting towards our 10,000 hours of being podcasts by bringing you another episode of the Comic Lab podcast, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
You guys didn't see it at home, but I actually rolled my eyes when he made that transition. But here's the thing. It's an eye roll of respect, because I'm every week I'm like, God damn it with that transition. But he sticks the landing. The motherfucker sticks the landing every time. And I'm always like, that was really good. Dang it, he made it smooth.
I didn't know what you were going to do. And then you said 10,000 hours and I'm like, jackpot.
Well, yeah, it's part of your 10,000 hours, and I'll tell you what, you've just spent a productive hour with Brad Geiger, which is something that everybody wishes they could say. Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
A couple people can say they've spent a productive 5 minutes, and my friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by the ever-fantastic Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/Comic Lab. So we'll go ahead and say that like a Philadelphian. Patreon.com. Get the hell off my lawn, you jerk! You broke your leg. Let me help you. You son of a bitch for breaking your leg on my lawn. Let me get you to the hospital. I'm going to help you so much. Oh, Brad, side note, did you get that Susan McTaggart pillow I sent you, by the way?
I did. As a matter of fact, it's a beautiful, a beautiful shade of chartreuse. It's got the embroidery, I've got it right here. It says, "Friends, always drive on the right side of the road and bring your vehicle to a complete stop before crossing at the intersection. Don't forget my new book, the 2011 Mazda CR-5 Owner's Manual, available at a Borders bookstore near you."
What a random joke. I thought you were going to say available in my glove compartment.